In this lesson, we're going to be going over the main panels we'll be using quite often when working with Unity. So we have the hierarchy over here on the left, we have the project panel, and right next to that we have the console. Over here on the right we have the inspector, and the scene and the game windows are going to be covered in a separate lesson altogether. For now, we'll focus in on the hierarchy. Now, each one of our panels is going to have this lock icon and these three dashed lines. So if we click on the lines, we have the option to maximize this panel, close it, or even add another tab. Within our hierarchy, this is going to include all of our files for the particular scene that we're working on. So at the very top right here, we have a menu, and this is going to look very similar to what we have in the game object menu at the very top here. So if I left click on create, you have create empty, all these different types of game objects in here. Now we can also right click in here and get something very similar. So we have copy and paste, duplicate, delete, but then we also have the same options of creating a game object within here as well. Right next to that, we have a search bar that allows us to search within our hierarchy. So as you start adding different types of game objects to your scene, it may be harder to locate specific game objects. So I can then go in here and then type in a name, so sphere, and you can see that we have our sphere within our scene, and we can also locate this here in our scene view as well. Now within our particular scene, we're working on the sphere scene, and we have a main camera, directional light, and a sphere. Note that we also see this up here as well, so we see sphere scene. Now I can also add an additional scene to this, so if I want to work on multiple scenes at a time, I can then just drag in a scene into my hierarchy. So down below here we have two scenes. We have the current scene that we're working on and the test scene. So I'm just going to drag this into the hierarchy here. And now we have two scenes within our hierarchy. So we have the sphere scene at the very top and our test scene. And note that we have files particular to the test scene within here as well. I can then work on both of these scenes simultaneously. Now, as a beginner, I don't recommend doing this. As you can see, it's very easy to actually work on these two scenes simultaneously, but then that means that you could easily move one file into another scene, and that may cause confusion later on when you're trying to locate a particular file and you don't realize that you moved it to another scene. So if we take a look at this, we also have a few other options if we are working with particular scenes within our hierarchy. So right next to each scene, we're going to have a stack of lines as well. Left click on that, and here we have the option to save our scene in different formats. We have unload scene and remove scene. So if we unload the scene, what that's going to do is essentially disable that scene within our hierarchy. So I'm going to click on unload scene, and you can see now it says sphere scene not loaded. Now we're working on the test scene. So everything within the sphere scene is gone, it's disabled, and we only have the test scene enabled at the moment. I can then go back in here and reload that scene, so load scene. And then if I want to remove a scene, I can left click on a scene that I want, and then remove scene. So that is the hierarchy panel. Once again, this is going to be used for determining what files are used within a particular scene. So if you want to drag something in and you want to add it to your scene, you drag it into the hierarchy or into the scene view, and then it will appear in the hierarchy itself. Let's jump down to the project panel now. Now in the project panel, we have all the files for our game. So far we've created two scenes and a prefab. So all these need to be organized, and there is a quick way to organize things within here. So as you start adding more and more files, you want to keep these organized in folders. So I'm going to right click in here, and now we have the option to create a folder. So I'm going to create a folder by left clicking on folder, and I'll name this to scenes. So I'm going to place all my scenes within that scenes folder. So I'm just going to drag it in. I left click and drag it into that folder. And note that we have an assets folder, which is the main parent folder for everything within our project panel. And then anything that we create is going to be part of that, including our folders. So we have the scenes folder, and now we have scenes within that folder. And we also have a nice little breadcrumb right here as well. Now going back to that menu that we just saw, if I right click in here, we have a number of different options in here. You can also create things like scripts, JavaScript, shaders, materials, so on and so forth. You can also import packages or export packages, and these are things that we'll be covering a little bit later on in other courses. Now, just like the hierarchy, we have the option to search for files within the project panel. So if I want to locate my sphere scene, I can just type in sphere once again, and there we go. We have our sphere scene right here. Now, if you don't know the name of the file that you're looking for, but you do know the type, you can then click on this icon right here, and you can search for a specific type. So if you know it's an audio clip or an animation clip, you can left click on that and then search by that. Next to that, we have labels. So if you're using labels with your game objects, you can search by label here as well. And finally, if you do have a search that you use quite often, you can then save that search right here. So that is the project panel. Next to that, we have the console. So the console is going to display things like what we see right now, which is a request error. I'm just going to clear that out. Not sure why that popped up. But the console is going to display errors, warnings, or notes. So if you're having issues with the script, typically you can use the console to find out what the error is. So if you want to display a specific message, or maybe you're having issues with a script, maybe it's erroring out or causing a warning, this will pop up in the console. Now, we're not going to go in depth with the console, but I do want to make sure that you know that the console is used for displaying these different types of messages. Lastly, we'll take a look at the inspector. So the inspector is going to give us more information about a file that we have selected. So I'm going to go into the hierarchy. I'm going to click on the sphere. And here we have information specific to that sphere. So at the very top, once again, we have the inspector name, which is the tab right here. Down below that, we have this cube icon. And this allows us to give a game object a particular icon. So if I click on this first icon right here, you can tell that we have an icon now that says sphere with a nice little blue background. Now you can change this to a label like this, or you can add a diamond. You can also add in a custom icon. So if I click on other, I can then select an icon that I've imported into my project. Now I'm going to remove this icon by clicking on none. Next to that, we have a checkbox, and this allows us to enable or disable that game object. So if I check this off, you can see it's now disabled. And in the hierarchy, you can see it turns a darker gray. So let's re-enable that. Next to that, we have the name of the game object itself. Now you can change the name in here, or you can also change it over here in the hierarchy by left-clicking on it. So if I want to rename this to ball, just type it in and press enter. And there we go. Now next to that, we have a checkbox that says static. This allows us to set an object to static, meaning we're not going to be moving that object. That's going to be important when you want to use light mapping or maybe occlusion culling or something of that sort. Now we're not going to be going over that in this case, so we'll just skip down to the very bottom right here. Now down below that, we have our tags. Now tags are going to allow us to specify a game object based off a tag. So if we're looking for a specific game object within our scene, we can look for it based off a tag. So let's say this is our player. I can tag it as a player. Now if we take a look at the main camera, this is already tagged by default with a tag of main camera. So if we're looking for this camera object within our game and we didn't know the actual name of the game object, we can also search by the tag itself, which is known as main camera. This is case sensitive, so just be aware of that. This is something that you'll be using a little bit later on. Now you can also add a custom tag as well. So if we open this up, we can go down to add tag. Then we can add a tag here by clicking on the plus icon. Next to that, we have the layer section. So this allows us to add game objects to a specific layer. If we open this up, by default, everything is going to be on the default layer. If we're creating UI elements, it's going to be added to the UI layer. We have things like water, ignore raycast, and transparent effects. And once again, you can add in your own custom layer as well. Now this is going to be more important as you start working with multiple groups of objects and you want to say hide them, or maybe you want certain groups of objects to be not affected by physics. You can add them to a specific layer, then have physics ignore that layer. Now along with that, we also have a layers drop down at the very top. This is going to be more useful when you're working in your scene view. So let's say you have a group of objects that you want to disable from being visible within your scene. You don't want to disable them within the game, you just don't want to be able to see them as you're working within your scene. Well, you can add them to a specific layer, then uncheck the eye icon so it's no longer visible within your scene. So we'll try that with our sphere here. I'm going to change the layer to water, then go up here to the layer section, and then we'll click on the water eye icon. And there we go. Now it's still enabled. As you can see right here, we have our checkbox, and over here it's still in our hierarchy. If we quickly switch to our game view, you can see it's still there. So we're just making it invisible for our scene view. Right, down below that we have our components, and we've already kind of discussed components before, but let's take a look at a few other settings within here as well. So you have an icon here for a little book with a question mark. This allows us to pull up documentation on that specific component. So if I click on this, it's then going to pull up the documentation for the transform component. So just about every component is going to have a little book icon. So if you don't know what it does, or you want to know more information about the settings for that particular component, you can click on the book icon and then it'll open up the documentation for you. Next to that, we have a gear icon. So if we click on the sphere collider here, I'll click on the gear icon and we have options here as well. So if you change anything within the sphere collider or any other component, it has values and you need to reset it to the default values, you can click on reset here. If you want to remove a component, you can go down to remove components. And if you want to move these up or down, so if I want to move this up, left click on move up, and now you can see it's moved up to the very top right above the sphere mesh filter. Now I can also copy this, so copy components. Then I can place this on another game object like the directional light. I can just left click on the gear icon once again. Now we have the option to paste component as new. So it's going to paste that component with the same values as before. Once again, if you want to remove it, click on the gear icon and remove component. So there you have it. We have the hierarchy, project, console, and inspector panel. In our next lesson, we're going to be going over the scene and the game windows.